Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mitra, Dr. John Yen, the College of IST, for inviting me to come. It's been a delightful morning so far. There's a lot of fog in the morning, so it was a very slow drive on Park Avenue. We don't get fog in New York, so it was great. I'm really glad to be here. In my talk, I'd like to talk about the human side of data science, which is often neglected. I think often with a lot of technical fields in society, there's a bridge between the technical, computational, the rigorous quantitative part, and then the human side, the social side. What is the application? Why is this important? And I think in my career, I've been very fortunate to have bridged those two domains. And this is why I'm passionate about data science, because I think it helps us understand our world. It helps us understand ourselves. And I can't take credit for the title from Data with Love. My title was going to be Humanizing Data Science. But then a friend told me that was way too academic, and it was not human at all. So this is a more human title. And I'm going to be talking about my experiences. My first real-world experience with data was working on Ron Paul's campaign. After that, I worked at Facebook for 2 years, which is a social networking site. Some of you might know of it. And lastly, I've gotten really fascinated by emojis, and I'll be talking about that as well. Feel free to interrupt me throughout. I'd love to keep this interactive and light. So as I said, I'm going to try to humanize data science by telling you about my journey, share some lessons I've learned along the way, and also give you practical tips for those of the students in the room on becoming a data scientist and getting your first data science job. So high level, what are the 3 takeaways I'd like you guys to leave with? 1, data science can be a deeply creative field. I think that's what excites me about it as someone who is a writer, who's a journalist, who has a very strong creative side. I find that fulfilled within data science also. And I'll give you some real examples. Data science can have real impact on meaningful social problems. And lastly, the part of the argument that I'm most passionate about for the students is that the best way to become a data scientist is to actually do data science. And I'll provide examples of how you can do that. So data science as an end-to-end process. So there's a lot of debate about what data science means. For me, I view it as a process beginning to end. And I'd love your thoughts on what is the first step in data science. I've had a few conversations. I usually get 2 answers. I'm going to call on my friends in the front row if no one else raises their hand. Get the data, yes. That's one answer. There's another answer also. Have a question, exactly. And those are the 2 competing questions that inform a lot of data science, a lot of scientific discovery. It's do you start with the question or do you start with the data? So for the purposes of this talk, let's assume we're starting with a meaningful research question. What is the question you're trying to solve? Then you acquire the data necessary to answer the question. You clean the data, you analyze the data, build models, you tell a compelling story, and then you use the story to drive impact. Now the first time I wrote this out like this, what surprised me is that only the middle 2 elements are technical skills. And often it's the middle 2 elements that get a lot of emphasis in the press about data science and how it's reshaping the world. And a lot of that is true. However, there's a lot of deep human skills necessary to do this. You need the right question. You need to be able to find the data, telling the story. So from my experiences, I'll argue that defining the right question is a lot about intuition. The best way to learn how to do that is to do that again and again in a lot of different domains. How do you get the data requires hustle. And I'll tell you some examples of that. I was reading I read a few Ph.D. dissertations on Twitter data and linguistics from a few years ago. Even as of 2011, 2012, a lot of these dissertations were based on analysis of 1,000 tweets, or a few thousand tweets, because it used to be very hard to get data. And now it's become easier, but often getting the right data is still challenging. And the last 2 are very important, especially in modern corporations, in terms of how do you use data to have impact at a large company, at a tech company, right? And that requires storytelling and also intuition and hustle. So at a high level, this is my journey. I was a student here at Penn State from 2003 to 2007. I had 1 class in this building on MATLAB, and I never showed up. But I still did well. I think I got a B plus maybe. So I'm glad you guys all showed up. After Penn State, I went to the University of Michigan. I got a master's in biostatistics. I spent a year in a Ph.D. program at the University of Chicago in neuroscience. I think in everything here, I'm using data, right? In my PhD program, I'm using data to understand brain function. At Michigan, I was working in a neuroscience lab also to use data on how people perceive pain. And then I left Chicago. I wanted to do something more applied, more in the real world. I spent a few months at the Columbia Business School working on some decision-making research. And I think at this point, this is where there was an epical moment in my life where I got an email one day saying Ron Paul is looking for volunteers to come to Iowa to help him win the election. And I've always been interested in politics. I'd never been to Iowa. I'd heard great things about it. And I thought it was a really cool thing to do in my life. So far, I had a pretty straight-laced academic background. So I went to work on Ron Paul's campaign. I spent about 6 months with Ron Paul's campaign, effectively becoming the campaign's national statistician. After that, I worked at an ad startup in California for a few months, Graph Science. I ended up at Facebook for 2 years. And I left recently to start my own data journalism startup. And in this talk, I'll mostly be talking about the Ron Paul, the Facebook, and the Emoji work. All right, starting at the beginning, Ron Paul. So this is Iowa. For those of you who have not been, most of Iowa looks like this. It's, yeah, okay, good. This is not a picture of some other state. I'm not trying to deceive you. And I think, so I went to Iowa. I walk in, it's a room full of 100 volunteers, mostly like 20-year-olds from all around the country. A lot of, like libertarians, like young kids, hippies with like, curly hair, like just kids who really like Ron Paul, who was a bit of a fringe candidate, admittedly. And at the campaign office in the middle of Iowa, we could do two things. You could either go out and canvass, you could knock on doors, drive around and knock on doors of voters and tell them to support Ron Paul, or you could sit in a call center and make calls. So obviously the second one sounded boring, so I went out driving with a few friends, knocking on doors of voters. The second house we went to, we walked up, and this is Iowa, very conservative, very traditional people, and we were like, hey, you should support Ron Paul, he wants to legalize marijuana, and like, these were my friends from Louisiana. And the guy was like, you have 30 seconds to get off my property. And we took that seriously, so we left. And I realized driving around isn't that fun. So I was like, what is the call center like? What is the phone bank like? So this is a phone bank. We call it a phone bank. It's basically a call center. It really lies at the heart of a lot of voter contact in modern campaigns, where you have a room full of like 100 volunteers with auto dialer phones, where there's a list fed into the system where we're calling these 10,000 phone numbers of likely voters. So the good thing in a state like Iowa, only a few tens of thousands of people vote in that caucus. So it's very easy to change the dynamics of that election if you have a large volunteer base. So as soon as I walked in, I was like, this is data. This is a data gold mine, and I would love to be able to do something with this. Because when they're calling voters, we're surveying them. We're asking them, who would you vote for? What issues do you care about? How likely are you to vote? And they're entering the responses on these phones. So I went up to the guy at the front of the phone bank. I said, hey, my name is Hamdan. I'm a statistician. I have a master's. I work at Columbia. And I want to help out. And he said, I don't know what that means. Like, just make calls. That's the best way you can help out. And that was my first realization that in the real world, often we expect our credentials to sort of open doors for us, and sometimes they do. But often in these types of situations where this was before Obama and big data became a big thing in politics, the onus was on me to tell them what I could do for them. And this is something a lot of startups talk about, is what problem are you trying to solve? Here, the problem I was trying to solve was that I wanted to play around with data, which was not a compelling problem for the campaign. So I sat down and I made calls for 3 days. And then I went up to the guy again and I said, hey, I'm a statistician. I can tell you what parts of the state, which voters to target. I can tell you how the volunteers in this call center are performing. I can give you maps. I can give you data to help run a better campaign. And when I said that, it was like night and day. He said, where's your computer? Log in right now. And that's how I kind of got sucked into becoming a Ron Paul statistician. It was really exciting. I saw it as an opportunity to go after low-hanging fruits in the beginning, right? So the basic things, keep track of statistics in the phone bank. How many people are we calling? How many people answer the survey? What is our persuasion rate? So we're often asking voters, if you're undecided to support Ron Paul. We started something where we gave metrics to every volunteer in the phone bank, and we put a sticker on them with how many calls they had made that day, what their persuasion rate was, how many people hung up on them, and they walked around with that. That wasn't my idea. I mean, I gave the guy the spreadsheet of the volunteer statistics, and he's like, just put a sticker on everyone. And we ended up sorting the phone bank where we had the best callers in the front of the room, who were just like, they were charismatic, they were charming, like they were hardworking, and it set the tone for the rest of the phone bank. And then we were giving the kids updates every hour on their statistics. So this is a graph of how many calls they had made versus how many people had answered their survey. And Before this, the phone bank was a mess. It was like a zoo. Like no one was working, people were just hanging out. And then after this, the kids had actual data they could use to improve their performance. And they were competing with each other. They're like, I'm at the top, I'm at the top. And what we did is that we took the top 5 kids, and the campaign took them all around the country in all their phone banks. They became the phone bank trainers. And this is us in the California office. So this is like, okay, it's so-so. It's like medium impact. How do you have more impact? And the more interesting thing we were able to do is to use data to inform who we were contacting and what we were saying to them. So quick background on the Ron Paul campaign. Ron Paul had supporters out there. We knew they were out there. They just didn't like to vote. They didn't like to vote. They hated the Republican Party. And Ron Paul was running as a Republican. It was a challenge for us. So we needed to find who they were and tell them to vote for us. This is called ID in politics, where you're identifying your supporters so you can get them to vote for you. And before this process, we were randomly calling likely voters. We were just going through a random list. Not we, but the campaign, because they didn't have anyone doing sophisticated data stuff, randomly calling through the list. And in Iowa or New Hampshire, you can get away with that because these are small states and you have 100 kids calling for 8 days. But as soon as you get past those early states, when you have a whole country to look at, and you're like, how do we figure out how do we make the best use of our resources, then we started doing some targeting. So here, for example, we went into Washington State. We divided up the state in terms of counties, in terms of age groups and gender, and we just sampled in each of these groups. And we found where are we getting the most support, where are we most likely to find our supporters. And then we dedicated all our resources to those counties, to those age groups, so that we could have the highest number of identified Ron Paul supporters. And then once we have those, we call them tags in politics, then we get them to vote for us on election day. We remind them, we robocall them, we do all that fun stuff. And then eventually we had about 10 of these phone banks running across the country. And it was just me. I was doing everything from like downloading CSVs, merging the stuff, doing analysis in R, uploading tags back to their campaign management system. Like it was all of that. And I think it was a really great experience for me because I was able to learn how do you prototype something like this so that eventually you can build it out at scale. And that's since been done. It's 4 years later, technology has advanced. This is a high-level overview of what is the role of data in a campaign. Because you guys might be listening to that, and you could be like, okay, that's cool, but like bigger picture, data can be really important in a campaign. And I agree. The most, financially, the most resources a campaign spends is usually on advertising. Ron Paul's campaign spent like $40 million on advertising. TV, digital, radio, print. Events is also a very lucrative industry. Direct mail is a huge, huge field. Campaigns spend tens of millions of dollars on direct mail. Often that's the best way to reach people in these rural states. And truthfully, I think these are the places where using sophisticated data could have had the best advantage, could have made the most difference. Since there's so much money involved in these areas, it's very hard to have an impact there. In terms of me walking in off the street, being able to say, here's how you should spend your next $10 million in advertising. Which is why I had a decision to make in terms of, I can focus on something where I know I can make an impact right away, versus I can write a memo and maybe someone will listen to it and buy TV ads in Mississippi or not. And I think this is a decision a lot of us have to make. These are trade-offs we make in companies in terms of I view this as prototyping, right? As getting a proof of concept of how data can make one operation of a campaign work better. And then it's the same in a company. It's the same when you're talking to clients, when you're trying to sell them something, ads in Facebook's case, where you get the least costly proof of concept possible and use that to get further buy-in. And that was my work with Ron Paul. I'll pause and gladly take any questions on data and politics or Ron Paul or stuff like that. Cool. That's me at the RNC with Romney speaking behind me. Facebook. So after Ron Paul, and I have to say this, I think working on Ron Paul's campaign was probably one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And after that campaign, I was like, okay, I should get a job, right? I need a real job because my parents were like, you should have a job. Just traveling the country with Ron Paul wasn't satisfying for them. So I started applying to like data scientist, statistician, analyst jobs around the country. And I realized that the Ron Paul thing was the thing most people wanted to talk about. Like I had entire 90-minute interviews where people asked me like beginning to end, what was it like on the campaign? What is Ron Paul like in person? It's something that set me apart. I think especially the idea that I had no direction and I walked in and created a role for myself that didn't previously exist. I mean, that's what startups love that stuff, especially large companies. Like a company like Facebook has 2,000 data scientists. Not every one of them has a list of this is what you're working on. It's a lot of self-direction. And I think that's very highly valued in the industry. And that's what I think that helped me out a lot. So after OnPol, I worked at a small ad startup for a while. Startup collapsed. I ended up getting a call from Facebook one day, and I worked there. I'd like to give you a rough overview of how data science works at a large tech company. So if you imagine a large tech company, and if you want to have influence at this company, there are two main pillars. There's the product, and then there's the business. So for a company like Facebook, the product is the app. It's the app that hundreds of 1.6 billion people use on a monthly basis. It's all of the components of that app, right? It's videos, it's friending, it's poking, it's checking in. All of the components, it's ranking the items in your newsfeed, it's people you might know. Each of these is its own product team at a company like Facebook. These teams are led by a product manager, there's an engineer, there's a designer, there's a data scientist. And then there's the business side. So the business side is how does this company make money? That's also informed by data. So for a company like Facebook, all of our money comes from advertising, where we are going out, talking to advertisers, talking to ad agencies about this is our ad product, this is why you should spend money on Facebook. And we're doing that in an environment where TV channels are making the same pitch, Google is making the same pitch. There's a lot of competition, and we need to prove that our ads work. That's where I come in. That's where our team came in. No, I wasn't the only one doing that. So I was working on the marketing science team at Facebook, which is designed, our mission was to prove that Facebook ads work. And we do that by doing research, by running experiments. We also work with clients, with large advertisers, to get them to think in a more sophisticated fashion about how they run ads, how they buy ads, how they measure ads, essentially. And I'll talk through some examples of that. So this is just, ad agencies are crazy. And throughout all this, I think what I find really interesting is that the relationships are often equally important as the data. And it's never the case where you have a really powerful piece of data analysis or data science, and you show it to someone like, this is amazing, this changes everything. It's always about finding the right point of contact, finding the right way to pitch it to them, aligning incentives. All of these are things I never learned them in a classroom. I learned them hands-on in my job. Just a quick background on Facebook ads. So most Facebook ads are in your mobile newsfeed. 90% of Facebook ad revenue comes from the mobile feed. They look like this. Some ads are direct response. They're asking you to take an action in the feed. Some ads are branding ads. So like Pepsi, Pepsi, you can't buy it from your newsfeed. So it's just a branding ad. From the perspective of the advertiser, they care about, does this work? Is this improving the metrics for our brand? Is this something that's worth the investment? And the way we do that is we run experiments. So our team, we go to clients, we go to agencies. Our goal is to get the industry focused on this experimental approach. Because without this experimental approach, they're just doing pre-post analysis. They're doing last-click attribution. They're using other models that are not as rigorous. So this is a very simple, from an academic perspective, it's very simple, where say Coca-Cola wants to show an ad to US millennials. We take that population, we divide it in half. For example, we have a test group and a control group. We show the test group ads, we withhold ads from the control group, and we observe some outcome metric. So in this example, it's sales, but it doesn't have to be sales. It's often brand metrics. So the way we do that is we have brand polling. So when we run ad campaigns, we'll poll people afterwards. Do you remember seeing the ad for this brand? How likely are you to purchase this brand next time you go shopping? How favorably do you view this brand? And the goal in all of these campaigns is to show lift, right? To show that this ad worked at improving this metric that you care about. And sometimes it's sales, sometimes it's brand metrics. And that is a baseline for the clients. That tells them Facebook ads work. And the goal after that is to get them to run these ads better. So how do they run these ads? The ad has the creative, it's a photo or a video. They're bidding, they're using different bidding strategies in Facebook's ad auction. They're deciding who to target. These could be audiences they're uploading. We have lookalike audiences. These could be third-party lists they're buying. And building a measurement strategy for them so that they can run experiments on their own and run ads better. And this is very challenging because a lot of these companies are not very quantitative companies. A lot of these are CPG brands and that traditionally they're not numbers-driven companies. So the challenge here is convincing them that it's a good way, that this is the best way of them measuring how well their ads are working. and for them to get the best bang for their buck. Something else we did is we looked at the impact of Facebook on other channels. So the biggest player in the online ad space is Google. Google has search ads. When I search book a trip to Bermuda, I'll see an ad for Expedia, and Expedia is paying to show me that at the top of the list. Now, say I search for book a trip to Bermuda and I click on the Expedia ad and I go to Expedia and buy a flight. Expedia will see that Google is driving their conversions. They will say that everyone who's buying, most of the people who buy tickets, they come to us from Google. And Google used to take that evidence and go to Expedia and say you should spend all your money buying ads on Google. And clearly this is it's a fallacy, because Google is a search, it's the last point in the funnel. When someone has already decided they want something, they search for it. So our question was, how do we make a better argument for getting some of those dollars that these guys are paying Google? And the way we did that is we ran an experiment. We ran a lot of experiments. So we looked at 20 campaigns where we had this test setup and this control setup, where people are seeing ads and some people are not. And then we measured, because the advertiser agreed to pass us data from their website, when people see these ads, do they end up on the advertiser's website, having come through Google? And then we took the last step. We said after they come to the site from Google, are they purchasing this item? Are they clicking through or converting? And based on that, we showed that people who see Facebook ads are more likely to search for these items on Google and end up on the advertiser's website, which was pretty interesting evidence. Because for a lot of these advertisers, they viewed search and Facebook as completely different channels. And here, I mean, from a psychological perspective, this is essentially showing priming effects, where people who see Facebook ads, they're not immediately clicking on it and buying the item, but later on they're Googling it. It drives their interest in such a way that they later end up on the advertiser's website. I mention all of this to emphasize, my argument that data science is, again, deeply human. That most of the interesting things that are happening here are in defining the right question and in telling a story and using that to have impact. Especially the impact part is very hard, right? Because you imagine a company like Facebook, we have tons of clients, tons of data scientists, and it's like, what can I do? What are the questions I should go after that are most likely to yield impact? Impact could be a client deciding to spend more money. That's the boring type of impact. A more interesting impact is the client is spending money more intelligently. They're using a more sophisticated measurement strategy. They're running experiments of their own. And those are the types of questions we encountered at Facebook. We also did a lot of work on personalization. So personalization is a big hot topic in the ads industry. We're showing people the right ad personalized for them. So there's a lot of ranking that happens on Facebook on the back end that matches ads to users. Most of that is outside of our control. It's outside of the advertiser's control. What they can control is showing specific ads to specific audience segments. So for example, as opposed to showing a Dove ad to everyone, all millennials in America, showing a Spanish language ad to Hispanics, showing something emphasizing fun and activity to people who are interested in sports. Like, Facebook has a lot of data. And one of the questions we asked was, how do we use that data to help advertisers better target, better personalize ads? And we ran some experiments along those lines. Any questions on the Facebook part? Cool. Now I'm going to move into the stuff I'm most interested in, which is emojis. So I was at Facebook for about 2.5 years, working on ads research, talking to clients, presenting at conferences. What I was really interested in was emojis. Take a step back. I was really interested in human behavior. What makes us who we are? Why do we behave the way we do? That's why I went to a company like Facebook. And then, I left. I was like, I don't want to do ads anymore. I don't want to work at a big company anymore. What do I care about? So I'm hanging out at home one day, and then Brexit happens. Britain decided to leave the EU. And I came across this article in my newsfeed, which is called "The World's Reaction to Brexit in Emoji." And this is the entire article. The entire article is, like Donald Trump, sad face emoji. Angela Merkel, angry emoji. David Cameron, shocked emoji. I was expecting the world's reaction to Brexit in emoji to be an actual article with data, but it wasn't. And that excited me. Actually, first it didn't excite me because this was my reaction to this article in emoji. But it excited me because I was like, this is actually doable. This is easy and I can do it. And I'm really curious to see what we find. So that's what I did. First, define the question. Which emojis do people on Twitter use to talk about Brexit? Which of these emojis are especially associated with Brexit? And how can we use hashtags to understand what these emojis mean? Very basic questions, driven by my innate curiosity about emojis and how people use them. So getting the data was pretty straightforward. I used the Twitter API. I sampled 100,000 tweets. I looked at the 5 top hashtags: not my vote, vote remain, Brexit, vote leave. I removed retweets. About 6% of these tweets had at least one emoji. Analyzing the data, fairly straightforward. I use regular expressions in R. I pull the Unicode emoji dictionaries. So each row is an emoji, and then I pull out each row is a tweet, and then I pull out the emojis in those tweets. And then I look at the emoji counts in the Brexit data set. And then I compare that. Luckily, there's a site called emojitracker.com, which you guys should check out. But it might give you a seizure, because it's one of those, it's just like a lot of lights flashing at you. It's basically a real-time tracker of what emojis people use on Twitter. And that gives us a baseline. It gives us a baseline for what are the most common emojis in general on Twitter. So that gives us something to compare it to. And then lastly, we look at the hashtags in these tweets, and we compute hashtag profiles for some of these emojis. So what do we find? These are the top 10 emojis in the Brexit dataset. Luckily, the British flag is up there as the second emoji, which means that my code worked right. I used the right dictionary. If it was the flag of Japan, then I messed something up. But what's interesting here is that there's a wide assortment of emojis. There's happy emojis, celebratory emojis, there's sad emojis, there's a heart. There's a wide assortment, and so here's a question like, what does this mean? So the obvious thing is we compare these frequencies, these proportions, with how often they appear on all of Twitter. And this is where we find the emojis that over-index on Brexit. So these are the ones in blue. And on the right, you have the amount by which they over-index. So the UK flag is 400 times more likely to appear in a tweet about Brexit than in a general tweet on Twitter. And then the thumbs up and the clapping hands, the crying face and the see no evil monkey also over-index. This is interesting. It's not a finding yet. It's interesting. It's like, what does this mean? And here the obvious question is, do the emojis people use correlate with the hashtags they use, or the side they have in these debates? So here, what we do is we compute a hashtag signature for each emoji. So this is my overall data set. These are the proportions of the different hashtags and how they appear. You see that Brexit is the most common hashtag, and then all of the others are about the same. And then I take, for example, the British flag emoji, and I look at the same hashtag distribution for tweets with the British flag emoji. And then I compare those two distributions. And that gives me an over-index profile. So the British flag emoji, which of these hashtags does it over-index on? Any questions about that methodology? Very straightforward, basic stuff. So this is what I get for the British flag emoji. Heavily over-indexes on vote leave, under-indexes on all the other hashtags. This suggests that people who use the British flag emoji with one of these hashtags are disproportionately likely to use it with vote leave, suggesting that maybe it's a nationalistic hashtag or it's being used by people specifically on the right side of the aisle. We find the same for the celebratory emoji, the party popper emoji, heavily over-indexes on vote leave. The crying emoji, this is called a loudly crying face, vote remain. People who want it to say are sad. They're also praying. Back when this first happened, there was talk that they might have a do-over election. And that's why I think people were hoping. This is all me making shit up, right? Like this is the data, right? But the story on the data is me making stuff up. And I think that's what's interesting here, where it's interesting to pair data science with domain experts. And I think that's what I'm calling for. That's what excites me about this, is replicating these types of analyses with folks who are experts in the political science of Brexit and how people feel about it, and getting their input in terms of what could this mean. And then also, of course, computational methods to help understand that, which are future directions. This is a rough way of looking at the hashtag signatures of the top emojis. So these are the 5 hashtags, and the darker shading indicates that these emojis over-index on these hashtags. So for example, we find most of the sad emojis on the right are heavily over-indexing on vote remain. The celebratory emojis in the British flag are heavily over-indexing on vote leave. Now I find this interesting because it's a good proof of concept that emoji usage is not happening at random. Before I did this project, I was telling people I'm looking at emojis and no one knew what it meant. Because a lot of young people, it's a very young phenomenon. According to many surveys, among people, kids 10 to 15, 60% of their communication is in emojis. And it drops off very heavily as soon as you get past 20, 25, 30. It's like it dies down. And if this is a new language, then it makes sense to ask, are people using these emojis at random, or does it correlate with the message they're trying to convey? And I think this is a good way, it's a good baby step at answering these types of questions. Something else we found is that even basic emojis can encompass a variety of meanings. So the British flag, here are just two examples. The British flag either can be used as a nationalistic, now we have freedom, we can rule ourselves, or it can just be used as a neutral placeholder for the name of the country. We find that there's a lot of interest in irony and sarcasm on the internet and in language and in building models to understand that. Here we find that the thumbs up can be genuine, as it appears to be in the first case. Or in the second case, it's deeply ironic. Cheers to everyone over 50 who voted us out for deciding our futures for us. Thumbs up emoji. And I think this is really interesting. It suggests that, so I've started to look into the literature in this area. There isn't a lot. I think using emojis in conjunction with NLP techniques to better understand sentiment is it could be a promising area. Conclusions, the Brexit chatter has a lot of emojis. Most of the top signature emojis of Brexit are positive and pro-leave, and we can find hashtag signatures for emojis. So I did that analysis a few months ago. I ended up publishing it in Vice, which was pretty cool. Any questions on the emoji work? So I did that, and the next question is like, what else can you apply this to? And then, about a month after that happened, this happened. Taylor Swift and Kanye West got into an argument. So these guys are pop stars. I was just like you. I had no idea who they were, so I had to Google them. It's okay. Taylor Swift and Kanye West are pop stars. They make music. I don't know. People buy their music. They're not academics. So we don't have to know about them. No, I'm kidding. They got into an argument. Basically, Kanye West put out this music video with a girl who looks like Taylor Swift. And he had a lyric in this video about a demeaning lyric about Taylor Swift. And Taylor Swift freaked out. She said, I didn't give you permission to use this. You're an evil person. And he released a video showing she had given him permission to use this. So it was an argument. And I was curious, this is happening in the world. How do people on Twitter use emojis to talk about this? So I looked at the top 5 emojis for tweets mentioning Taylor Swift and Kanye West over the 1-week period of this feud. And this is kind of interesting in that Taylor Swift gets a lot of the lovey romantic emojis, the heart eyes, the kissy face. Kanye West doesn't seem to draw that same level of loving emojis. He gets the fire, he gets the praying hands. The most interesting thing here, for me at least, was the snake emoji. Why is the snake emoji the 3rd most common emoji people are using to talk about Taylor Swift? Which was interesting. This is another way of representing the same data. So I think this is where this kind of thing gets interesting, where we can map emojis for 2 different search terms and understand how people are using these emojis differentially to convey different emotions. So everything on the left is more associated with Taylor Swift. Everything on the right is more associated with Kanye West. And here you see that, again, all of the lovey emojis and the US flag cluster in Taylor Swift's corner. Kanye West gets the fire and the celebratory hands emoji. You see that the face with tears of joy is a neutral emoji. And this makes sense, because this is the most common emoji in the world. It was Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year in 2015. It's just a neutral emoji. It doesn't mean anything. Or maybe it means something so complex that it doesn't register in our data yet. And then the snake emoji is there again. So I was curious what the snake emoji meant, so I looked at the hashtags. I looked at the hashtags in these tweets. And the dominant hashtag in tweets mentioning Taylor Swift and Kanye West is Taylor Swift what up. So this led me down another rabbit hole. What is Taylor Swift what up? I Googled Taylor Swift what up, and this refers to a cameo by Justin Bieber, who is a Canadian pop star famous for Baby One More Time, Baby, 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 or I always get the song wrong. But Bieber posted this on Instagram, Taylor Swift what up, of him FaceTiming with Kanye West. And when he did that, all of his fans started using the snake emoji in conjunction with Taylor Swift what up. And Instagram actually banned the snake emoji when this happened, because people were just harassing Taylor Swift by posting the snake emoji, which is interesting. After this, I wondered, how do people use emojis to talk about other celebrities? And I wondered specifically, is there a common emoji language people have when they talk about fans they like? I view this as, it's like basic linguistics research in terms of when people talk about a given topic, what types of language do they use? What types of words do they use? Here we look at what types of emojis they use. So I looked at Beyonce, Bieber, DJ Khaled, Drake, and Rihanna. And I find that 4 of the top 5 emojis, ignoring DJ Khaled in the middle, 4 of the top 5 emojis are the same. They're the red heart, the hard eyes emoji, laughing with tears, and the crying emoji. Beyonce gets the queen bee emoji because that's her signature. Everything else is the same. Justin Bieber gets the fire emoji. Drake gets the fire emoji. The male stars seem to be getting the fire emoji. And then DJ Khaled is in the middle. He's very different because he gets the key emoji. And this is something, if you know about DJ Khaled, he talks about major keys to success. That's like his mantra. He talks about the major keys and the keys to success and how to make it. And his followers, when they mention him, they use the key emoji a lot, which is interesting. The most interesting thing I found here is, why is the crying emoji showing up for celebrities? And it seems to me, I'm not an expert in love or in pop culture, it seems to me that sometimes love hurts. So I looked at the crying emoji in tweets about these celebrities, and this is pretty interesting. People have really severe emotions. This has actually got me in tears. I'm so proud of you, Justin Bieber, how far you have come and what you've achieved. And the loudly crying emoji. She saw my sign, pointed at me and smiled. I've never cried as much in my life. Crying emoji. I think we can do text analysis on these tweets to come up with some of these conclusions, but I think the emojis add so much color in terms of understanding how people use language, how people use a new language, a graphic language, to convey their thoughts and feelings about stuff they care about. And then this got published in Motherboard also. I've done some more emoji work. This is, I looked at the RNC versus the DNC. Everything on the left is more associated with the DNC. This just seems to suggest Democrats use more emojis than Republicans. Republicans like to use the elephant emoji and the bear emoji. Again, validating that this code is working right. This, I think, is interesting. So on Twitter, there's a big concept of Women Crush Wednesday and Man Crush Monday. Basically, people use these hashtags when they're talking about celebrities they like or folks they admire, their role models. And here, I think this could be a way of looking at how gender different emojis are, and even looking at the hearts, right? Like the blue heart is most used with Male Crush Monday, and then the purple heart, and then the red heart, and then the purple heart is the most feminine. And I don't know. This is interesting. I think this could help journalism in terms of, if this were a tool where some news event happens and you type in hashtags and you get an emoji profile of how are people responding to these things in real time. This is not evidence in and of itself. It's directional evidence. Like maybe there's something going on here. And I think in general, journalism is not a very data savvy industry. So I view this as a good proof of concept that maybe data can augment traditional journalism. I'm going to go back to my conclusions. Data science can be deeply creative. It can have real impact on meaningful problems. And you become a data scientist by doing actual data science. And this is more helpful for the students, but I imagine there are a lot of educators and faculty in the room. I mentor lots of folks on how do you become a data scientist. And I think for me, just getting experience actually doing this, going through this 6-stage process on your own with limited direction, ideally in a variety of fields, is the most powerful it's the most powerful item you can walk into an interview with, because it's, in most jobs, there's not a lot of direction. There's a lot of autonomy at a company like Facebook, at Google. There's a lot of data, and you have to figure out what you're going to work on and how it has impact. Did anyone see the analysis of Trump's tweets that this guy did recently? So this was a really cool analysis. Basically, this guy looked at Donald Trump's tweets, and Twitter tells you what device is being used to tweet it. So sometimes his tweets say tweeted from iPhone, sometimes they say tweeted from Android. And this guy looked at the tweets and he said, it seems that all of the crazy tweets are coming from the Android. Like when he's like, Hillary Clinton is so dumb, I don't know how she will win, and tweeted from Android. And then when it's a reasonable tweet, I will allow our GDP to grow 12%, make America great again, that's coming from the iPhone. So this guy's like, this is interesting. How do you use data to quantify this? So he looked at all of Donald Trump's tweets over the past year, and he figured out what are the words that appear most commonly when he's tweeting from Android versus from iPhone. And the words from Android are crazy, weak, joke, dumb, dead, funny, guns. And when he's tweeting from his iPhone, they're all like, hashtag Trump Penn 16, hashtag America First, hashtag Make America Great Again. And he combined this with documentary footage showing that whenever Trump is seen holding a phone in public, it's always an Android. Trump is not an iPhone user. So the finding here, the journalism finding, is that Trump is tweeting crazy things from his Android, like Hillary is so dumb, I hope she dies. And then his staff are like, oh my God, he tweeted something crazy, let's tweet something normal from the same account. So that when you go on his account, you don't see all these crazy things. There's like a balance. This was really interesting. It's a really simple, and here this is all about defining the right question. It's a very narrow question, and that's what makes it exciting. Because I think if you started this out as a thorough linguistic overview of Donald Trump on Twitter, maybe it could have been a journal article somewhere, but it wouldn't have been this interesting. And I think that's why finding the right question is really important. And also telling the story in a way that figures out what do people care about. People who are following this election really care about, is Trump crazy or is he sane? And looking at his tweets can help inform some of that. In his messaging, and I'm not a psychologist, but what type of rhetoric does he use? So that's my advice to the young people, is to do something like this. Do this type of a project using open data. You can do it as a research assistant in an academic setting. I've worked in psychology departments, medical schools, business schools. All of these are settings that have a lot of data and they don't know what to do with them. You can do it while interning at a startup. I also recommend to the students to find their competitive advantage. There are a lot of fields that are heavily saturated with data science and folks with statistical skills. Quantitative finance, very, very sophisticated field. Genomics, statistical genetics. It's very hard if you're going into these. You need like 12 years of postdoc experience, and this is where there's a role for academics. But then there are also fields where there's been hardly any data science work done. Journalism is one of these fields. Politics was one of these fields. Most campaigns don't know anything about data, even at the presidential level. Like, apart from the two big campaigns, everyone else is sort of on their own. And I think it's a very exciting world where you just have to hustle and find these opportunities and have stories to tell. I think that's what I find most valuable, is that when kids are walking into these interviews at these companies, it's all about what are the stories you have, about what impact have you had. And often there's a bias against academics who haven't done a lot in the real world. And I think pairing this type of real world applied experience with academic educational training could be a really helpful way to blend those two domains. My future work, I'm really interested in data journalism, emojis, political text analysis. I'm working on some campaign finance data. I think there's a lot of room for building a program that pairs data scientists with journalists to build a newsroom of the future. And I'm currently, I'm talking to advisors and figuring out whether that's a startup, whether that's a lab. I think there's a lot of potential here. And then I think there's a potential here to leverage data science students across the country who are looking to make a name for themselves and work on something interesting and tell an interesting story. And I think it's all about pointing them in the right direction. And the hardest part is, how do you teach this? And I think that's what we're all trying to figure out. Is I've done this for 5-8 years. Many of the folks in this room have been doing this for your careers. How do you teach this in a succinct way that kids can then take and run with on their own? And I think we're trying to figure that out. So I'll end there. Thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take questions. And thank you again for inviting me. This was a great experience.